It is my pleasure to share with you kind of the journey we have done at Hornet. My background is I'm an entrepreneur and investor all my life. Currently, I'm the founder and CEO at Hornet. I'm usually based in San Francisco, but right now I'm actually in Hong Kong. It's one of the few COVID-free or mostly free cities in the world, and I have the privilege to be here right now. With the downside, it's quite late here. It's way after midnight. Originally, I'm from Munich, Germany, so I cover a couple of regions there as well. Hornet is the world's gay social network. We are for gay men. We are considering ourselves the community home base that is available anytime, anywhere where you are on the planet. We have over 30 million users since we were founded in 2011. We're the #1 gay app in dozens of markets, ranging from France to Russia, to Brazil, Turkey, Taiwan, and many more, and also rapidly expanding across Europe and in the US. Dating to me is a function. That is not necessarily wrong, but there are a couple of things that are wrong or not, let's say, preferable with online dating. Generally, dating is quite awkward. People not necessarily always feel particularly comfortable dating. We know that from scores and reviews and just generally the feeling. Dating, of course, also has a relatively small usage over the life cycle of a person. So you don't usually date your entire life and not every day or every time. So it's not such a high usage activity over the lifetime of a person. And of course, if done well, it also has a high churn, which is kind of a self-defeating characteristics. Dating has high customer acquisition costs. And generally, dating has high, I think someone said low, I think dating has high revenue per user. So once a user is paying for a dating service, they usually actually pay quite high prices, but as a total lifetime, they're not accruing a lot of lifetime value. So on the period of dating, they pay more than many other products. But when you look at the lifetime of a user, the lifetime value is quite low. And that all accrues, in my opinion, to rather mediocre enterprise values, because high customer acquisition costs and high churn obviously mean that you can ultimately generate less revenue out of a user compared to, let's say, a social network, which have very low customer acquisition cost and very long retention. So if you look at just some of the market numbers and look at the blue ones are dating sites, and the red one, the green ones are social networks. You see that they are actually usually exceeding the enterprise value per DAU because of these characteristics. So that's just to span the argument on the dating sites, and also, of course, for us, the economic incentive to move or look beyond dating and how the future looks like. Now let's talk about community. Community is a place. A community is a place where people gather. I want to give some examples, and since I'm not a very creative person, I took from a recent conference from Spiro Ventures, a mind map or a mentioning from the attendees, and they came up with these more or less, randomly collected examples. And it was quite interesting that the LGBTQ community, which of course is part of, or the umbrella for the gay community, came up very high in the mention of these users without further prompt. It's also interesting that two sports-related communities that are digitally enabled, Peloton and Strava, came up very, very high as well. So there's great examples of online communities or product-led or digitally enabled communities. There are various ways to describe them. Others are offline, or usually more offline, such as churches, alumni, and the Battery in San Francisco. And then there's many other examples there as well. So communities are places. So these are not functions. I don't alumni someone or something. It's not a verb. And it's a place where a lot of things happen between people who are attending and coming together over commonalities. And I think that leads us also a bit to the definition of the community and some of its main characteristics, people come together over shared values. There's a commonality, something we have in common, what we agree on. A community, unlike groups, is an inclusive setup. So anyone can join a community. I can go to a church, I can go to a pride parade or a gay bar, as long as I kind of adhere to those shared values and the common sort of, conviction or the things that bring you together. So communities are not exclusive, so they don't kind of keep you out. They allow you to opt in as long as you adhere to the common standards. That creates a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. So many of them have a mission or some sort of a larger or overarching goal that they also want to pursue. And it's hinging on the ability of every single of its members to contribute and contribute to the level they are willing or able to contribute. So, you may be a good athlete and run a very slow marathon, or you may run a very fast marathon. The experience, the commonality of it is not impaired by this. And now, how do community and dating relate in my opinion? And I'm putting this out there, obviously, for discussion. And dating, as I mentioned, is a function, whereas community is a place. To that end, I believe dating is really a subset of community. So these are not mutually exclusive in any ways or at odds with one another. Dating can happen in a community, but the fact that it's an option or a subset among other things that can happen in a community, it creates a level of serendipity and even plausible deniability, which are, in my opinion, very important sort of, relief for many people, because I'm not seen as dating, which always sounds a little bit like I need to date. There's baggage with this perception or the feeling of need to date. And whether it's right or wrong, I'm not judging that, but it's an undeniable fact. So I think one way to make dating way less awkward and make it more natural than serendipity, it's a great way to kind of let these things happen if they're meant to happen. And if they don't happen, you can still have a good time with people who are like-minded, or, you just have a good laugh or have a virtual drink or whatever it is you're coming together. What is the common denominator is love. Love is a key term that, that belonging and the community bring together. And dating obviously is also about love and belonging, and these things actually intersect quite a lot. So I think dating and community in that sense have a very strong link, but community is a bigger tent and a place where these things happen. And if you think about the history, and I'm now more narrowly meaning the history of mobile apps, that's kind of my world. Probably some other people can also think about other examples in the offline work. The history of apps is actually quite short. We have only 12 years and a little few months since the first iOS apps actually happened. Everything before then I don't want to call really apps. And when it started, I'm old enough to remember there was an app for everything in the first few years, and they were very functional. So even the phone became an app, or a chat, and everything, the weather, everything was an app. And of course, one of those was dating. In 2011, actually, something happened in China that WeChat came along. WeChat had a very different model. It was actually more a place, a technology-enabled place where people could connect over or creating content while executing functions. So it became much more a mobile operating system for people and ultimately communities to emerge. So I think that is a model that today is much more inherent in most apps. They're not single function apps anymore, but they become places where certain things are happening or can happen. So they're enablers. So in that sense, I think the history of mobile apps is somewhat also leading us from this functional view towards this thinking of a place where things can happen. At Hornet, we obviously went through that journey, and I wanted to share a little bit how we kind of came along this journey to ultimately be today where we are, which is giving users giving our members the ability to amplify the radical, the formative power of the gay community with cutting-edge technology, so that the users feel comfortable to share the experiences with friends who understand and validate their life at any time and anywhere. And that's where we are today. And I want to share a little bit the history, how we got there. So when we started in 2011, many moons ago, we literally were just yet another dating app. Even someone in our industry called us the app that Grindr should have been, because we had a few more buttons and bells and whistles, like the Explore feature, which Grindr now 9 years later then also finally had. But this wasn't in nature different. It was a dating app, as you probably would recognize immediately. And of course, we are all embarrassed now by the design of these very early apps as they were. In 2017, we started very actively to move beyond dating and the sort of the search for someone or the finding and matching to someone by adding stories, which were initially our own newsroom. We had 10 journalists on our team to produce content in 5 languages, which would be considered icebreaker. It was mostly written content and some video content. And we also created a curation of literal places, of actual gay community places, such as bars or nightclubs or beaches or community centers. In fact, over 5,000 worldwide were curated by also our team. And so we wanted to create sort of more places and content to trigger sort of these kind of interactions. This was a very crude way to do it. And in the end of the day, somewhat too over-ambitious. It tried to be kind of the everything of gay. And in the end of the day, also too crude, because it became just a listing. So this was a first attempt, which brought us a few components that we are still using today. But the way it was presented was simply not good enough. You cannot just put a dating app and the Yelp into one and then say it's a community. It became much better in 2018 when we created the feed. The feed meaning a story, an image-based feed, where a story as an article story, a written story, with, of course, the typical functions you would expect from any social network, where people can start, to tell a story and then interact over those stories through, likes, comments, shares, and the typical primitives around the social network. That became our homepage. And so we looked very different than any other dating app, at least in our space, because it became sort of a feed, a flow where people were able to discover things along the way. It wasn't a sort of forward-looking, I'm searching for something, I'm searching for a restaurant, I'm searching for a date, and with these and these criteria, but it was a backward, more like, let me browse through it and see what's coming up. Oh, that's interesting, let me go a little deeper. So you basically create a much more casual way to discover people. And of course, this feed was optimized to your interests, and you were able, of course, to dig deeper into things that you found more interesting. And last, that feed model was really the breakthrough for us to be seen as a community and a socially enabled content app that is now being completed with video stories, which we just launched 4 weeks ago. We're very proud of this, to be the first here in the LGBTQ community to bring this to a community-based product where people can express themselves with ephemeral video short stories as another form to create those sort of opportunities to connect. Some of the key elements that, of course, are not so visible in those screenshots, which may have painted the picture how this journey has happened. But I think what's really important for this to come to life is that we at any juncture help our members and people to tell their story in whichever format they prefer. So multiple formats, whatever they feel comfortable. Some are more people who like to comment, but they're commenting heavily. Some like to chat privately. Some like to present themselves. Some like video, others hate it. And all these things can happen on the platform, and we make them look as good as possible and help them to do that. We encourage authenticity. We do not want people to kind of filter everything to sort of perfection so that they look ultimately unnatural and unapproachable. But we like to have people, you know, as real and out of the moment as possible. And that also chimes with another big aspect is our Hornet badge of authenticity, which is a little icon that sort of shows that you have had a certain proof of work by being on the platform for a certain period of time, engaging, having followers and others. So that is, of course, proving that you are an engaged and sort of a community member with a certain vintage, which allows you to get a better authentication among other community members. That is another form of authenticity. We foster role models. These are very important for us. In fact, we have a whole influencer roster that is working along a playbook, which basically encourages people, of course, you know, to express their authentic self, especially as a gay man, you know, to overcome stigma or self-shaming and present themselves with all the, you know, the richness, the diversity they are, because that makes them interesting. And it's not a fault. It's the opposite. It's something, you know, they should embrace and not try to kind of filter away and try to look at something that they are not and that they think social networks expect them to be, but we do the exact opposite. We empower community contributors to grow the community. So we have a total of 250,000 of our community members that are active contributors. So they would do translations, moderations, they would produce content, they would be featured guys, health ambassadors, and so on and so forth. We protect people's privacy, of course, on various levels, and that is going all the way to keeping the space as safe as possible, especially given that we are operating in many countries where being LGBTQ is still criminalized, and you know, often the police or blackmailers are trying to you know, get to our members. So that are some of the key elements to make the community what it is. And I just want to conclude here with 3 examples. This is an example from Russia. You see a feed post. I'm not sure it's big enough that you can read it, but you see there's a lot of text, and there's it's also in Russian. I don't speak it or read it. Maybe some of you do. But it's, for instance, a discussion to talk about transphobia, the hatred against transgender people in Russia, which is quite a prevalent topic there. And you see that these posts get thousands of comments, and that allows people to, you know, enter into a topical conversation. So it's a bit like a Reddit, if you will, in that incarnation. I'll give you a very different example of a user who presents himself, which is probably more like our typical. This is our web version. Looks a bit more like a regular profile, though we are just showing now the dates, the statistics. But what you see here is that this guy is even wearing a Hornet t-shirt on his profile picture because he's kind of part of Hornet. And he's also a translator, a sport captain, a super moderator, a featured guy, a health ambassador, and a beta tester. So this guy is kind of breathing and living Hornet in and out every single day, and he is Hornet. And he contributes to the community. He keeps it healthy. He wants it to grow, and he wants it to be part. And that is, of course, something that is very typical for communities, that people can contribute, step up, get badges, get rewards for being part of this community.